All right, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar of our monthly series. Today's webinar, as you know, it's going to be on GRC on ServiceNow. Just quick housekeeping information. So you are only on listen mode. So for any communication, just type in the question session or the chat. Regarding the questions, at the end of the webinar, we're going to be able to answer your question, maybe not all of them, depending on the time. Please type in whatever you want to know, and we're going to try to answer them all. If not, I'm going to email you the answer after the webinar is over. The webinar is going to be recorded, so in case you have to leave, in case you want to share it with someone else in your organization, just email me at julia@closing.com or sales@clovesinc.com, and we're gonna send you the recording right away. So we can start. I want to give you a brief presentation of Cloves and myself, and then I'm gonna pass the stage to our technical consultant that is gonna take care of the demo today. So I'm Giulia Rastelli. I'm a marketing specialist and account manager here at Cloves Inc. For the people who don't know, Cloves Inc. is a ServiceNow partner since 2011. We are based in Santa Clara, California. We are a full ServiceNow shop, and meaning that we take care of everything on ServiceNow. We have experience in every aspect of ServiceNow. We have over 100 customers all over the United States, mainly. Bay Area is our main territory, but then we have done projects in Europe and Australia and pretty much all over the world. In fact, we have key people in the United States and Australia, and we try to cover everywhere where ServiceNow is. This slide is to show you a little bit of what we do and our portfolio. So if you want to take a look for a second, this is what we do, but there's many more. We are going to every aspect of ServiceNow. And this is just something if you wanna take a look at our portfolio and check our portals. This is the link of our website. Please take a look. There are some super cool portals that we've done. I think if everything is okay and you don't have any questions so far, I can give the stage to Dante. So Dante Hooker is our senior technical consultant, one of our best. He has 8+ years of experience on ServiceNow and almost 3 years of experience specifically with GRC tool. So now he's gonna take the stage, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Can everybody hear me okay? Julia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Policies. I'm also going to cover observations and then the overall at the end, the dashboard, kind of like gives you an overview of your GRC dashboard within your company. So next thing here we have, first thing we're going to cover is the authority documents. Within ServiceNow in Geneva release, we have multiple authority documents that you can actually download from the actual sources. They're now connected to the actual authority sources, meaning your COBITs, your HIPAA, your ISOs, your ITILs. You can also download directly from the source. So what does that mean? Going forward within Geneva and forward, you can now come in to the actual authority documents and go to your authority sources. Go down here to UCF, import UCF content, excuse me. I'm just going to wait for that to load. And I could choose any of the existing authority documents there. So if we wanted any more ITIL, you have also your ISO, right, your ISO compliances. If you're a 2001 shop, right, we can go ahead and bring that stuff in. So once I check the box and I can click update, it'll take quite some time, but we won't do that for this exercise, but I'm going to show you how it looks at the end. Once you click update, it imports all of the authority documentation, citations, and controls. This is very good, so if you are, again, ISO 27001, you would automatically get all of that documentation. So I'm going to pull up one of the ones I've already imported for this demo. So I'm going to take a look at ISO, this 27001 2005B. And so what it does, it brings in the authority document. It brings in each citation and their reference. And then also, you can link it to existing policies. Now, I know the question you may have, will it automatically give you a policy? The answer is no. You would have to create your own company policy and link it to this. So for this demo, I created, actually it was already there, I used the demo out of the box IT policies and procedures, and I related that to this authority document. So what happens in your entire change of authority document, you can link it to your citations, which will automatically populate over, right, from the import of your authority document. You can link it to new controls you have, so you can create new controls based on this authority document. And I'm going to go on controls right after this. And also link it to existing policies. And once we cover risk, you can also link it to existing risk. There are multiple ways to do this, which I'm going to show you here in a second. So what happens after you have your authority document, your citations, you then want to go into what they call your controls. Now, actually, before I go to controls, I'll stop there. You want to go into your policies. Now, this is very important because in your policies, right, underneath GRC, this is where you want to relate your authority documents directly to each individual policy. So you will actually know, hey, this IT policies and procedures, if I scroll down here to the bottom, right, authority documents is going against ISO 27001 here. Now, the good thing about this IT policy, it doesn't have to be one-to-one. I can relate this policy to multiple authority documents. So if you have one policy, for example, change management that may meet ISO and ITIL, you can relate those authority documents right on the policy level. And that's good, so you don't have to create multiple records of that policy. So that makes it a little bit easier, so you can have one source policy, multiple authority documents. So once I have my policy, I can give it a scope. Now, scope can range from anything from location specific. You can always also break it down to a department specific. Really, the scope is based on your definition. So if you have a definition of scope, of how you want to define it rather than not a location, you could define it based on any criteria that you so please. So again, next you have your citations. These citations, again, are from my import of the authority documents. So the citations, again, relate directly to the authority documentation. So they will just show any citations I have related to the authority documents will also show in this list. So since I have 2 authority documents, all their citations that pertain to this policy, I can go and pick and choose. So I'll give you an example. They would all give me all the authority, citations within those authority documents, and I can go and say, okay, I need, A24, A26, all to be associated with this based on the 2 authority documents that I have. So you can limit your scope of citations to this policy. They don't need to be all because you're associating it with the authority document. You could say it only pertains to the subset of the citations for this policy itself. From here, you will go into controls. Now, even though I'm remaining in the policy record, there's multiple areas you can define a control, which I'm going to go through in a second. So first things first, I can go within the policy, and I could say, I want to build my control based on this policy record. So again, I could relate any existing control, which I'll do in a second, or I can create a new control. So if I go here to my, control, and GRC, under controls, I'm just going to go to all. I'm just going to pick this control here. So within this control, I've now defined very briefly, right? And again, we're doing this for this demo purposes. I could define a control. Now, if you see this control, right, says UCF source. What that means is that was based on that import that I did from the beginning, the import UCF content. So since I imported the UCF content, not all, there are some that will bring in the controls with it. And if they do have controls defined in their source documentation, we will import them into ServiceNow. ServiceNow will import them using the import process. But again, not all authority document imports contain controls. But I wanted to show you this to say that it is possible for those that do have it. So back to the control when you define it. So you'll have your source. You have your state, whether it's active, draft, or inactive. You can classify this control, whether it's preventative, corrective, or detective. And then the purpose. And then how frequent we're going to do this control. Now, if this is going to be an event-driven, continuous, or periodic, you could set those controls within there. You can also set the owning group and the owner, and any delegate that you may have in case of the owner not being available at the time. You can classify this as a key control. This is therefore strictly for reporting. It will help you show your key controls in your reporting, and then also show material risk, as it says here at the top, as it pertains to more than one policy or risk. So if you state that this control is across multiple policies, then you can flag this as a key control. That is the definition of what ServiceNow defines as a key control. It's related to multiple policies or multiple risks. All right, so moving on, I'm going to pull up another control record to show you the difference, one that does not have a UCF content download. So with this one here, this is our control within control definition. So within this control, we're defining it as active, detective, technical, and event-driven. It is a key control, right? And this is just some basic information. So now once you have this, you're going to define the actual definition of this test. So this is what the control is. Now you're going to define what the test does. So I'm just going to pull up my favorite link here for definition. So once you define your test, this is going to be the activity that's going to take place that gives the group a ticket to work as a control test. So for example, if you're in an audit and you say a password needs to be changed every 90 days, this control test would trigger that every 90 days automatically. So let's go through this one. So this is a control test definition. This is my control, the record we just displayed. So the definition of this test is going to give us the name, and it's going to give us the duration, and then the method, whether it's assigned to a group or the condition. And so once we have it there at the basic condition, we can have the control it's going to, the remediation group, how it's going to escalate, and then the most important, how often it's going to run. So right now this control test is going to run monthly, every day on the 31st day of the month at 4 p.m. And in this we have the execution step, the expected result, how we're going to do it, and what we're going to do. So the field types that we're having in our control here at the bottom. So what we do here in all the collecting, supporting data. So we have our data's purpose, the table, and the fields. So what this does down here at the bottom, this now defines our query, and it's very similar to our report query. So right now we're saying the database server is not empty, is what's in scope for this control test. So it's going to go out and query all the CMDB CI database records, right? Return these 3 field values and give us where the database server is not empty. And when that test instance now kicks off, now we have an instance or iteration of that test every, as we defined up here, 14 days on the 31st month of the day, of each month, excuse me. So what happens here is now you have your test definition and your test instance, and we're going to go on one of the instances. And this is what a ticket looks like when a group is assigned to them. So now IT security has this ticket, this control test instance. So with this control test instance comes to them, they will work it just like any other ticket in ServiceNow, like an incident, like a problem, like a change. They can provide information, and then at the end, you can have the option of marking it a success or failure. And what I mean by the option, there's many implementations that we've done to where they've had put a workflow around this process, meaning that I may come in, if I'm a part of the IT securities group, I will come in and I say, okay, the state is a different state as evidence provided. And then once that is kicked off, it will send a notification to the control test owner. The control test owner will then come in and say, yes, they approve that the evidence is sufficient, and they will mark it as a success. All right, so that is so what I just went through very briefly was the audit, right? Then we step from the audit, excuse me, not the audit, we step from the UCF import, we step through the policy, and from the policy we looked at the authority document as well as the citations. From the citations, we also went through the controls, control test, and then finally the control test instance, which the person works, is where we are here on this form. So the next section of what I'm going to cover is now audit. Now I'm going to stand this record for the moment. As you see, this control test is associated with an audit. So within GRC, audits contain control tests. So for example, if you are running and control, or like this record here, control test periodically every 30 days to provide evidence for various reasons, you can also make sure that is also included in an upcoming audit. So once someone creates an audit record, which I'm going to go to now, you can come into your audit record, and when you create your new audit record, you can define who the assignment group is going to be. You can, the audit definition, which I'll cover in a second. This one is already complete, so we'll come back to that in a second. Short description, And the most important, you want to come in and define your control test. Now here, you can relate existing control tests. Now, what does that mean? If you do a control test every 30 days, every 90 days, when an auditor comes in, you can create an audit, but you don't have to redo the control. You can relate any current control that you've already passed to say, go and verify. Now, if they want to redo the control, you can create a new control, and it kicks off a new definition, a new test instance to where they go and gather the data currently. But if you're doing something every 90 days, you don't have to do it again just because audit has now showed up. You can show them the current control instance or the latest one related to this audit, which is why only the edit button is here. And then you simply just go in to the audit or the control test, and you can relate the latest control test for that control that you want. In this case, we're doing the control test verify sample of server attributes. We're going to save that. So now when audit comes to town, you can show them, here are the control tests that you are all worried about, and you can go in and review that data for yourself. Now, within the audit, if they says, this is great, but I need more, right? Now, you don't necessarily need to go and associate a new control test to this. For that, they have what they call audit activities. Now, this is, again, just like any other task in ServiceNow. You would create a new activity, right? You will assign it. We'll assign it to someone. I love Amsterdam, so I'll assign it to them. And, need password verification. Right? So very simply, an audit team can do that, and that does the very same thing as a control test. For example, it's not the same as doing the query and the filtering, and it's not going to trigger every 30 to 90 days. This is going to be an ad hoc information only needed for this audit. So it's only going to relate and pertain to this particular audit that I'm doing at the moment. So again, that is audit activities. So the next one we have is the scope. This is the same thing, just like any other scope we have. So within the scopes, you can define it as regions, locations, departments, and so forth. Scope is based on what you define. The next one over is audit remediation. If there's anything that needs to happen because of this audit, so let's say one of the control tests failed in the audit, or the audit activities was, hey, yep, you passed, however, we need you now to close down one of these ports on the firewall. You can open up an audit remediation task again, right? We'll assign it to Amsterdam to close port on firewall. And this is, call it preventative because it's not really corrective in this case. Well, it could be. We'll call it corrective. And you can put it in any state you want. So let's put it in work in progress. And you can base the impact, we'll just say it's medium for this exercise. So now that, again, that remediation is only associated with this audit. So anytime anybody goes and reviews the audit history for this particular audit for HIPAA compliance, they're going to see it, they're going to see it associated with this record. Also on the remediation, which we've done in other implementations, is that this is, okay, in a remediation plan, I may not want particularly that team to have access to the GRC app. So maybe only GRC support teams will have access to GRC and all their components, meaning risk and everything else, remediation, audit controls. So when it comes to here, the audit owner or control owner will now create a task related to this remediation task, right? So they may need a change. They may need an incident. They may need an enhancement or a defect, something of that nature in order to actually perform this. So if you want to be able to, let's say, relate existing records, so if I go in here and I can do an edit on the task related list below, I could say, CHG, and let's say I want this change number, Java application server change, which is what I need to do, and it's not ideal what I just said, but that works with this for this exercise. So I can relate change records or any other task to this remediation task. So again, this is done by some of the implementations. This is not out of box. You can expose this. It's just hidden. But what we could do is we could do exactly just that and relate changes directly to the remediation task. Their idea was in that is that they wanted the remediation task to be planned. So as a GRC owner, control owner, I would define my plan is to, you know, what do we stay below? You know, update the Java server. And then we'll create a change below. Now, the good thing, once you have everything completed, the audit's done, you can mark it complete, right? We have this one is 100% complete. We can mark it closed complete. One other component that we've done as an addition to this, let's say we've had any control tests that actually failed. All right, I'm going to mark this as a failure. So once the control test failed, right, and we mark this audit closed complete, it would auto-generate a risk, right? It would automatically generate a risk on the risk register that says, hey, you know, control, verify sample attributes are all standards. We have attributes that are not standard. We're going to create a risk, and we need now to mitigate that risk. So if we're closing that audit, now sometimes you may close an audit to allow for another step of remediation to happen, which this particular client did. They says, we'll close the audit, but we want to generate a risk. So it will automatically generate a risk from any failed control test, and they will work the risk as a separate entity from the audit. So if they could not remediate it, right, as we stated here, audit remediation, and they said it had to go outside of the audit process, it would auto-generate a risk only when the audit is closed complete and the control test is marked as failed. So having said that, I will move over to risk, because we just talked about creating a risk from the audit. So we now have our risk register. What the risk register does simply is just gives you a place where you can register your risk in your organization. You have your scoring levels, which is your inherent risk, or your inherent significance, inherent likelihood, which is down here, your residuals, and your likelihood. Now, a lot of questions are, what are the difference? Your inherent risk is what's going on today. When I get this risk right now, what is that significance and likelihood? And then you will set those significance and your likelihood. And that will give you your score. So if you notice, this 4 times 2 is 8, so it gives me inherent score. So what happens with the residual, that is your actual risk score after you've mitigated. When you're done, right, you may say, hey, you know, now this risk is not necessarily, it still may be the same, in this case it is, but it may be lower, it may be higher. So you can definitely do that at that point after you mitigate. That is your residual. Is your after you've mitigated and everything's done, you're saying, okay, after everything's finished, this is actually the residual risk. So again, risk is very simple as far as the form goes. Has the owner, has a definition, it has a state, of course, category. Now, of course, these are all modifiable. The risk profile we'll get into later. And sorry about that. The risk profile we'll get into in a second. And then the applies to we'll also get into right after I discuss the form. The description, very short. Any additional information, talked about the scoring and the response. So within a response, when you have a risk, your risk management team, GRC team, or both, will come in and you will now quantify, you will score your risk, and you'll say whether you're going to accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. Now, what we've done in some implementations, when you go to a response and you want to mitigate, the mitigation now deems a remediation plan, right? So this is how it all works together. So again, not out of the box, but you can say, hey, if it's mitigate, I need at least a remediation plan in place because we're gonna mitigate this. You can also relate the risk to authority documents to follow the chain all the way back to controls, as we stated earlier. Of course, the policies, and you can also relate this risk. If you're going to do a change, it can also go to this directly to this risk as well. Again, some other customer says we never want to associate a change or any other task directly with the risk. Everything will be against the remediation. So if I do a remediation plan, I'm going to do a change, I'm going to do an incident, I'm going to only relate that to a remediation plan. So going back up to the top on the risk, again, you have your profile. Now, what a risk profile is, and I'm going to go there. The risk profile, it defines basically the profile of what this is, right? What am I defining this risk from? So the profile in this case is a vendor, right? The profile types that you see below are vendors, right? So you can define, let's say, vendors exposing sensitive data in your environment. That is a definite risk, right? It can have a low likelihood, but that is a risk that happened. So with the profile, and it also, I'm going to go back to the definition, then you also have what they call, sorry, wrong place, definition, which is vendor discloses confidential information, and you relate it to that profile that I just showed you. Now you have two things, a profile for vendors and then a definition of any risk that may occur in your environment. Now the definition is not what actually happened, the risk is. So the risk record that I showed you first is that something happened. So now you don't necessarily create that risk until something happens. So you won't have just a list of risks to actually take action on. You now have a profile and definition that you say, hey, these things may happen in our environment. So that's all you're doing with the profile and the definition. You're defining what can occur in your environment. Then when it does occur, you create the risk, right, which like we did here. We're saying in this record, I'm pulling back up, that Samsung, right, exposed confidential information. What are we going to do about it? Now, the inherent and likelihood is what we gathered from the definition, but the residuals is what you're gonna take after you mitigate and see what actual the damage is. So again, I covered, to kind of just go back through again, authority documents. We went through policies after that. After policies, we went through audits, controls, control test. Then we went to the remediations, we went to risk, and then finally, what we're talking about here is how your risk profile and then your risk definition. So lastly here for this demo, what I'm going to cover is the dashboards. So the dashboards are broken up into different things, but I'm going to cover just my GRC here. So my GRC gives you a basic overview of the entire GRC landscape as it pertains to who's logged in. So in this case, you know, I'm an admin, so I can see all of the GRC app. So I can see any UCF information, meaning any import of any authoritative sources that were updated, right? So this shows me that I updated these controls, these control IDs, and all these different data points as I imported any information. As we scroll a little bit further down, which gives us a lot more data, and a lot of people remove this one off the top, we have what they call super controls. What are those? Those are controls that are span across multiple policies and multiple authoritative sources. So if you have one control that is against ISO and ITIL, you know, it would be considered as a super control. Just handles multiple policies, multiple authoritative sources. That's all that really is. Scrolling down a little bit more, we have our compliance by authoritative document. So you can see a holistic view of all your control and control tests As they're coming back, success, failure, it gives you compliance ratings. So you see HIPAA right now, 100% compliant, and we're also 100% complete of everything that's in progress. So when we look over here at our control coverage, what does that mean? That means all the controls that we've downloaded either from the source or have created, we're only using 66% pertaining to our organization. PCI, we only have 20% pertains to our organization. And for this dashboard, COVID, we don't have any that we're using pertaining to our organization at the time. So that's what the coverage report says. If you are 100% HIPAA organization, then you will need to go through the HIPAA authoritative source and make sure you're using all the citations and controls that are available. Then it will show that you're doing 100%. Then we also have controls by authority document. So COVID has 267 controls, HIPAA 6, PCI has 5. And then we have our audit, control test by audit. Just kind of shows just a little breakdown. Observations by audit. Remediations the same way by audit. And then remediations by observations, which is also still breakdown. This is all dealing with your audit landscape here. All right, that is what I wanted to cover today. I wanted to open up the floor for any questions. Did we have any questions in the room?
Yes, we do. Let me read it for you. Let me find the questions. Wait. That's interesting. I can't find the questions anymore. Perfect. Okay, found them. So we have, first question we have is, how is licensing handled when it comes to redistribution rights for the authority documents, specifically ISO 27000?
So when it pertains to licensing, I would always defer to your ServiceNow account manager because it's different for every customer. But just in general, to give you an answer, licensing, I know the GRC application itself has a separate license for it. If you have access to GRC, there is no separate license to download the authority documents. I hope that answered the question, but again, if it's strictly a license question, ServiceNow account manager can handle that. But as it pertains to GRC, when you have access to it, you have access to download those authority documents. That is not an additional cost from my understanding.
Okay, so another one, I believe he's asking if we have come across an ERC or FERC implementations.
FERC implementations?
Yes, I believe this is, yeah, we can answer like offline this one because maybe it requires a little more technical thing. I'm gonna save it and I'm gonna email Sangram that he asked the question.
Okay, yeah, let's discuss that one. Okay, yeah, we'll take that one offline and give you an answer. Okay.
Another question is, does ServiceNow have crystal reports like statutory reporting capability?
Okay, yeah, I'll answer that. They have an it's not necessarily an integration, but you can do an import into Crystal from ServiceNow if you would like. There's definitely things that we could do there. Out of box, they have what they call performance analytics, which is their kind of version, if you will, of Crystal reports in ServiceNow. But again, if you would like to use an external source like Crystal or whatever, we've definitely done projects where we've helped do either REST calls or database to where you can do your own reporting. So that is definitely capable there.
Okay. So Cindy asked, can you change the controls to monthly, quarterly, and biannual?
Absolutely. when you define your control test definition, and I'll bring that up here. I'm just going to bring up a new one. You can set this however you want. You can run it on demand, daily, weekly, monthly, periodically, and you can set it however you want. So, and that iteration will be when, however you set it. Every 30 days, 90 days, it could be every 2 days, whatever you want. Yes, you can absolutely do that.
Okay, so Michelle says, are controls imported from the USF?
From the UCF, yes.
Yeah, sorry, UCF.
No, you're fine. Yes, some are. The ones that have them available, they are imported. The ones that do not, they don't. Now, these these authoritative sources are not owned by ServiceNow. These are they're going out to like the websites of ITIL, the websites of ISO, and all these where you can download the actual authority document, and they're pulling it and parsing that and pulling it in. If they have that available on those authority sources, they would definitely bring it in. So for some of them, we do have those already here in the tool. So again, it is possible and it does happen. So, but again, it's not for all. So if you see here HIPAA, we did the import, it automatically brought in these HIPAA controls because they are at this source URL. So if they're in the source, they will be imported.
Okay. Another question, it says, 100% compliant means what one picks and chooses to measure?
Absolutely. So, good question too. So on HIPAA, right, this is probably glad we landed here. If you're saying I'm only using 66% of these, the coverage of all the citations and controls. So based on this 66% that pertains to my organization and the controls and control tests, I'm 100% compliant based on the audits and control tests that I've run.
Okay, so another question is, how do you link a control test to a change ticket?
Okay, I will show you that, and it's not necessarily a controlled test, but I will bring it up. There's multiple ways we can do this. But again, as I explained earlier, and I know we went kind of fast, but we do it on the remediation task is what was we done for other customers. You can put in place a relationship if we want it, and I believe it's already out of the box. We can expose it rather, which is where we can expose the task, right? We can expose it there. So let me grab my control test. One second. I'll grab the remediation is what I want. So the remediation that's associated with a control or an audit, right, here's where you would associate your change. So I can either say I want to create a new task, which will bring me up what kind of task you want. I'm going to say change request. And I'm just going to say test, right? And I'm just going to submit it because I don't want to do anything else. Now that I come back to remediation, you see the actual change associated. So again, to the remediation is where it's doing right now. But again, you can definitely build if you want it directly against the control test and not have that third layer of remediation. It's just an exposing of the related list there. So it's definitely doable, and it maybe takes 1 minute to do. So it's not a big deal. But yep, that's how you do it.
Okay, perfect. Then we have, how much time does it take to implement GRC?
2 years. Joking. Sorry. It takes, I would say, anywhere between 30 and 90 days. 30 on the greatest of greatest things. I've done one, and it took everything out of the box with minimal configuration, and I would say it was 30 days of development time, and development and UAT. But I would say really to be more on the safe, it's like 60 to 90 days. The majority of it is making sure the processes align with what you do in your company, and then making sure everyone who doesn't understand they're going to get a task today, like, for example, audit may not live in ServiceNow, and that training piece is very vital, right? So it's not just dev time of that time. A lot of it is process and training. That's really where the rubber meets the road, because a lot of times with the configuration that I've done in the last maybe 4 or 5 different implementations of this is mainly a big bulk of it was at the end. It was like 2 to 3 weeks of just getting everybody used to what's going to happen, right? Training everybody involved who's going to get these tasks.
Cool. Another question. Is there project management functionality in audit module?
There is not a project management functionality in audit module. There's not. Project management is a separate application, lives alone in ServiceNow. You know, definitely, we had a demo on that actually before, but that is a separate application. You could, right, the way audit is managed in a sense, you can say it is managed from like a hierarchical type thing where you have your audit, right, and then you have your subtask, to be very basic, right? So in this case, if you looked at this like a project, right, without using project, you can say audit is your parent project record, control, test, and test definitions is your project task. Really, the definition is your project task, right? So someone is going to work these control, test, definitions just as you would a project task, and then that's how you run it. When all the project tasks are done, or in this case, control, test, control tests, sorry, are complete, then you will complete your audit/project. So if you work it like that, yes, but if you're asking specifically for project management, that is a separate application.
Perfect. So another question, is there a limit to the number of admins assigned?
No. It's just role-based. So you can have, you know, in GRC, I believe there's 2 roles, 2 top-level roles, I'll say. There's a GRC admin and GRC user. GRC admin can basically navigate the whole entire application, make all the changes as needed. It cannot make form-level changes, meaning adding fields of that nature. You need a ServiceNow admin for that. But it can do all the basic admin functionality, which is like this here. Define the scopes. If you wanted to change your risk criteria, which is the thresholds, the likelihood, you can change them up to 10 instead of 5 and 5. So they can deal with all of this information, import the UCF content. Those are all GRC admins. You don't need a ServiceNow admin for. However, if you are a GRC user, you do not see that information, right? So you only see above, right? Just in very basic, very high level.
Great. 3 more. So should it be let the end user populate the GRC database?
What, I guess I would need a clarifying question with that. If they mean by GRC database, what exactly would that mean?
Okay.
So maybe
yeah,
we can reach
I'm gonna talk to him offline and see if we can answer this question. The other question is the controls is similar that SLAs on ITSM.
Oh yeah, if you wanted to put SLAs on any of your control tests, then you can absolutely define them just like you can on incident. Yes, you can.
Okay.
This is just another task, just like any other thing, and you can definitely define SLAs for control tests. The thing that I would caution you on is that when you're in audit, you know, you may want to be a little bit looser with your controls based on whatever you got going on. So, for example, for a customer that I implemented for, they thought they wanted SLAs, but really they wanted reporting. Because sometimes you get into a loop, right, where I provide evidence, it's not enough, I provide evidence, it's not enough, and now it looks like I'm missing an SLA, but really I provided this evidence, but we're just discussing. So maybe you just want to show that, hey, let me report on things that's still open, and rather than putting an SLA on it, it looks like someone's not doing their job when they're actually working with audit. So that's where I would say, but you absolutely can put SLAs on that.
Okay, then we have, what would you recommend if an organization define their own controls but want to use UCF?
Okay, I get that. You can definitely and certainly use the import of the authority document, and you can this is you can create your own controls for that. You don't have to use theirs. So you can do one or two things. You can say, hey, I want to import this authority document like I showed you before in the demo, and then you can just remove the relationships to those controls, and I mean, it's pretty much, yeah, you can create new ones or use the ones that do import with the ones that don't have that data. So you don't have to use theirs if you don't want to.
Perfect. And last one, is there an IT vulnerability module in ServiceNow? Is it part of GRC?
Yes, it is, and it is not part of GRC. IT vulnerability is separate from GRC application, but they do go hand in hand, of course, but they are separate. So IT is dealing with mainly security vulnerabilities and things of that nature, which do at some point spawn into risk, right? And we'll do a demo on that probably this coming series. So that's something definitely that is there, but it's a separate application.
Perfect. Do we have any other question? I don't think so. I don't have them here. Last chance to ask. Oh, one more. Okay, no, I'm gonna take this one. Yeah. Okay.
So that's it?
Okay, now there's Ron says, can you repeat, please, the last thing you said? So probably the last answer that you gave.
Oh, for the UCF?
Yeah.
I think we were talking about the UCF. Yes.
Now
So
regarding, he says regarding risk.
Risk. Oh, so for the vulnerabilities regarding risk.
Yeah.
Yes. So in the vulnerability application and the implementation that I've done, what they've done is that let's say you have a security vulnerability, right? And something happened, some attack may have happened in your firewall, some DDoS attack came through, you know, and so let's say you don't have that defined as a risk, right? Now this is a real risk. DDoS attacks are a real risk, but you don't have it defined. So from that security vulnerability, right? From that security vulnerability, you can definitely say, hey, once it closes and completes, if there's not a risk for that vulnerability, we can go and create that. Once it's closed complete, we can go and query our risk definition table, right, and say, hey, we don't see this in here. We'll add that to the risk definition. And now we have that as a recorded risk. We can alert the risk management team, and that's what I do with that implementation. We send them a notification so they can finish, right, defining that risk, the profiles, and everything they need to, but it initially creates the initial risk for them.
Okay, one more question, and then we have to call the day. So does, yeah.
Good question.
No, they keep coming. So does ServiceNow have data encryption? For example, can attach documents, or there is text indexing inside of the document regarding encryption of documents. Maybe we can email this.
Yeah, I can answer it. I can actually answer that very shortly.
Okay, perfect.
On the field level, there's data encryption. What does that mean? I can encrypt this field. On the actual attachment, there's currently, and I could be wrong, there's currently, I don't see any data encryption on the attachment. But on the field level, anything you put in any field, if you want to encrypt any one of these fields, we can encrypt those fields and say it's only viewable by, for example, HR, right? HR data cannot be seen by even admins in the HR module, so unless you have an HR role. So you can encrypt that data to where they cannot see someone's salary information, for example. So yes, on the field level, I do know for certain, but I can get back to you on the document. I want to be for sure before I say no. But my first thought is it's not there on the document yet.
Okay, last one, it says, regarding the answer you gave before this one, is a thank you. And then, does the risk management team you are referring to also have an app in ServiceNow?
So in GRC, there's a risk, and then Geneva, which I wasn't covering here, there is a risk application. Now, this is totally separate, but also integrated with GRC, right? But in Geneva, they released a risk application, right? For this demo, we didn't go over it, but it has a whole process around the risk register, Same thing I covered all within the GRC demo I just gave, but I just didn't cover the actual module. So I covered everything here, profile types, right, definition, the actual risk, the remediation. So it's all there. Yes, there's a separate one. But it's also, so when you go to all risk here, it's the same as going to GRC risk here. So just different place, but when they introduced the application, it gave you all that functionality that I showed you in the demo for the risk.
Perfect. I think we're all set. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Dante, thank you. That was a great webinar. Oh, another question. Okay, let's do
This
this.
is the last one.
Yeah, last one. So the same guy is asking, the risk application is a component of GRC?
No, it is not. So if you have GRC enabled today and you are on Geneva and you've upgraded from Fuji, you will need to enable the GRC risk application. Now, I know your next question may be about licensing. I would say check with your account rep. I'm not sure 100%. It's all based on your contract if that's going to be additional charge.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, guys. It has been a pleasure and hope you enjoyed it, and see you next month for the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.